I'd love to know from you first up, what's influence to you, Lourdes? What do you understand that topic to mean, or how would you define the word influence?
I love that. And I haven't really thought about this, but I mean, in my line of work in the last almost 2 decades in business, I believe influence can be defined as when you're walking your talk. You get to have the ability to influence people when they see that in our space, you're not just greenwashing the word sustainability, for example. And that's why we define leadership as doing the right thing when no one is watching, because people will actually feel and see what you're doing.
Welcome to the Find Your Influence podcast with Anton Guinea, where we unpack all things influence and we help leaders particularly find their influence by talking to amazing humans and finding out what influence means to them, who they've been influenced by, and who they have influenced. And this podcast episode, proudly sponsored by the Guinea Group of Companies. The Guinea Group helps leaders upgrade, upskill, uplift their teams and their influence. Welcome to the Find Your Influence podcast here on Christmas Eve 2025. You're with Anton Guinea, and today we've got another amazing guest, Lourdes Gant. And Lourdes and I met at a we met at a business conference recently. We've got the same business coach, JT. Lourdes is a Canada-based strategist and operator who works in the intersection of sustainable industry, which is really interesting. I learned a lot about Lourdes' business when we spent a few days sitting next to each other at this conference. And Lourdes is into governance and emerging technologies and positions her work around helping founder-led, mission-driven organizations turn organizational knowledge into practical AI leverage. With a strong emphasis on values, judgment, and risk management, Lourdes uses AIs to strengthen the trusted ways of working rather than introducing avoidable confusion. But what I love about Lourdes' work is Lourdes is moving into sort of this whole coaching and AI space, but Lourdes is the CEO of Blue Horizon Legacy, which is a remote Singapore business, and the managing director of Manatee Holdings in British Columbia, where she's involved in sustainable aquaculture. I think we've got the first aquaculturalist on our podcast. And that's all about seafood supply, including geoduck and sea cucumber. You're talking to someone who is an aquaculturalist in geoduck and sea cucumber, and some of those initiatives, the initiative used to, I don't know if farm's the right word, to cultivate those crops were developed by Lourdes' company. Let's hear more about it. Welcome to the podcast, Lourdes Gant.
Thank you very much for having me. That's a very kind introduction and gives a whole gamut of a lot of things that we've been doing in the past 30 years. So thank you for having us on the show.
Oh, thanks for coming. Tell us more. I'm intrigued by, before we get to the AI stuff, Lourdes, maybe could you just expand, because I think the way that you explained it at Mega Success was a phenomenal explanation. I loved, I was intrigued by that explanation that you gave of the work that you do in that aquaculture space. Could you just bring our listeners on a little bit of a journey, pretty please?
Sounds good. So my husband started as a commercial dive fisherman with 10,000 hours under the water and was seeing the devastating impact that the fishermen were doing to the ocean's ecology. So decided to farm/ranch the species that he fell in love with, which is a king clam called Geoduck. It's actually listed in the Japanese Emperor's List of gourmet foods, and eventually introduced it into the United States. And obviously we're Canada based for this specific company. And so he started this journey as an ocean rancher in 1988. Didn't realize it will take 30 years, 20 years of political lobby to get the license, and 10 years to actually grow the animals. So we had our first harvest 2 years after COVID in 2022. And so that's kind of the gist of what we've been doing. But really, most importantly, is I think the mandate of creating the most environmentally beneficial food production operation on land or sea anywhere in the world was what was our path, the vision of why we ended up being in the sustainable aquaculture space.
Can you just say that again slowly, just for all our viewers and listeners, just so that they really get the concept of this? You want to be the best in the world, Lourdes.
So you can hear that I've said this so many times. So to be the most environmentally beneficial food production operation on land or sea anywhere in the world. That was our North Star, if you might have to call it that.
Love it. And I love business owners who are so mission driven, who are so on point and on purpose.
We like to say, if you're in business, it's a good collaboration between people, planet, and profit because it has to be profitable other than being in the circular economy.
Right. So it's people and it's the planet and profit.
Yes.
That is so cool. I've never heard. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love that planet aspect of it, and I love the sustainability because I've had some people on the podcast before just talking about recycling and stuff, and I asked the question, what can the average person do? And they said just do one thing, just make a difference. But we're making a difference by the way that we recycle. You're making a difference by the way you farm these these animals that are potentially endangered, and you're creating this industry to, I guess, keep them alive to a degree.
Yeah, so and that was the main reason why my husband went into it was because originally when I joined the space, we actually have 66,000 of quota from the wild fishery, and then 18 years later, it's now at 51,000. So most fisheries are collapsing, and so this was one of the reasons.
Wow. And why do they collapse, Lewis? Why have you, what is it about your business that the government or the regulators have trusted you to go from 6,000 to 51,000? That's obviously, nine times, 900%. Why you? Why your organization?
I believe that the government knows who's been taking care of the ocean's ecology. So they have very strict criteria of who they grant the license with. And so you have to meet all of these criteria to be able to be granted just the privilege of being able to take care of part of the ocean. So here in Canada, a lot of people doesn't know even if it's done in the United States, the way that the method is done in Canada is called subtidal, which is offshore, while in the United States, for this specific species, it's intertidal, where they own a part of the beach. In Canada, we lease it from the government. So we have a 25-year lease originally, and then it became 15-year lease because they have to assess that you're actually following your conditions of license. So it's a stringent process. And in the wild fishery, it's actually very monopolized. There were only 55 license holder. And so once we gave up our fishing licenses, we ended up being full-time aquaculturists, and now we get to take care of these 89.1 hectares of part of the underwater ocean.
Whoa. That is beautifully put. You take care of 89.1 hectares of underwater habitat.
Correct.
Wow. You are actually creating a legacy. You're making an impact. You're changing the world. You're changing the world for, I guess, for future generations and at least for this, for species on the planet.
We'd like to think it that way. You're into the leadership space, and we'd like to say that our three pillars of sustainability is leadership, partnership, and stewardship. Leadership defined as doing the right thing when no one's watching. And then partnership, obviously, we can't do this alone. As I mentioned, we have to have collaborations with different stakeholders, government, investors, our clients, and obviously a lot of the people who doesn't know about the industry sometimes think of aquaculture only in the finfish, wherein there were bad actors in that space for a long time. And so when they hear the word aquaculture, sometimes they have a connotation that everybody is doing bad things. But just like there's bad people and there's good people, there are also good operators. And obviously the last part is stewardship, as you mentioned. This has been a legacy business for us. My husband started it 30 years ago. I joined 18 years ago. our son is 16 years old. So we have partnered with somebody who has also a teenager in their hands. So this is very much a long-term plan. And if you're familiar with the way that in the Far East business is done, Japan has created a 300-year plans. And so we plan to stay this way.
That's big thinking, Lourdes. That's a long 300-year plan. My golly gosh. I don't think I've ever spoken to a business owner yet, Lourdes, who's mentioned that. I have a 300-year strategy. Wow, that's off tap. Can I bring you back to one word that you use, which it just hit me in the heart. And rule number one of interviewing is never go back too far because you'll lose the listeners. And our listeners might not have heard this word. You said it is a privilege to be able to do this work. So for you, you feel like honored nearly to have this impact on the planet.
I do. I came from the Philippines originally. I immigrated to Canada 21 years ago, and coming from a poverty stricken background, I never lose sight of how much opportunity and how much blessing that we were given now that I'm in the land of milk and honey, maybe land of the fish and land of the meat. And so I always take to heart that this is something that has been given as a blessing to us, the business, the people that we work with every time.
Wow, it's a blessing. Wow. Imagine if more people saw their work as a blessing, as a privilege, as, like nearly a gift. Wow. Gee.
It really is, but it's also like a lot of obligation and
Of
responsibility.
course.
A living thing, as I mentioned, animals, just like any other, now have to construe it because I have two Siamese cats. Like taking care of a pet, we actually say that our animals are like our babies, our fur babies. Now we have Scooby Ducks as our babies.
I love it. Yeah, we got two little fur babies, and we had a Santa paws photo the other day with the dogs, so that was very cute. No, I love it. And let's talk leadership just for a moment. And before we even get to leadership, let's talk influence because that's the topic of the podcast, obviously. Like, I'd love to know from you first up, what's influence to you, Lourdes? What do you understand that topic to mean, or how would you define the word influence?
I love that. And I haven't really thought about this, but I mean, in my line of work in the last almost 2 decades in business, I believe influence can be defined as when you're walking your talk. I think you get to have the ability to influence people when they see that in our space, you're not just greenwashing the word sustainability, for example. And that's why we define leadership as doing the right thing when no one is watching, because people will actually feel and see what you're doing. And then you get that credibility of having influence if you actually are not. Greenwashing is the word that came to my mind. So, case in point, one of the things that we struggled before was actually putting into aquaculture the sea cucumber industry. And we weren't able to actually successfully do it because we didn't have the right collaborators slash influence to the stakeholders. We had people in the neighborhood meet because they didn't know what we were doing. Hence, that's why we also did our podcast, because education was key to our industry. And so we didn't have a buy-in from them. So 9 years of work of lobbying to aquaculture sea cucumber was a failure. And, we weren't able to influence the right stakeholders. And so that point, we knew that at that time, okay, this was the things that, as an experienced transformer from that failure was did we do right, which was spearhead the species because we knew that sooner or later it will collapse from the fishery. Second would have been, you know the mistake was we didn't get a buy-in because we didn't educate them first. And then last, what we could have done better would have been, we could have gathered their buy-in first before we even think of aquaculturing that specific species. So to me, influence is if you get the buy-in because you're doing the right thing. Sometimes education comes into play in that as well.
Beautifully put. Thanks so much,
And
Lourdes. That's such a great definition. I took so many notes then, because I think you're right. I think the credibility piece is important. So a lot of people will be we will be influenced by people that have gone before us, that have done it, that walk the talk. And I think that's where the credibility piece comes in. But I love that you put an education spin on it. You know, influencers impart knowledge. They share something with us. Um, but and then I love that walk the talk, which is where you started. You've got to be able to, you got to be doing it. You can't say one thing and do another, Lourdes Gant.
Yes, and I think when people do talk and then they don't walk their talk, and it's a surefire way of not being able to influence anybody, right? Because you know, even with our children, you know what they say. They don't hear what you say, they do what they see you're doing. Same thing.
I'm with you. And there's someone always watching, Lourdes Gant. There's always someone watching. Cool.
Always something happening, and even though no one's watching, right? Just our own conscience, like our higher self sees us all the time. If I have to go woo.
Someone's exactly right. Beautifully put. And people might say, you do it behind closed doors and no one will know, but you'll know.
You'll know.
You well said. I love it. Conscience, integrity. We call that integrity. Now, Lourdes, here's a question, and the answer to this might be your hubby. I'm guessing. Who's had the biggest, or maybe not? Who's had the biggest influence on, I guess, your journey so far? Like, who's really been that person that walked the talk, that's been credible, who does the right thing, who educates first, as part of their influence strategy?
Oof, that's a hard question because I'm fortunate enough to have so many people. I had so many coaches, so many mentors who really led me to the path to where I am now. JT is one of them, as you know, as one of our business coach. And then I had a mentor actually who's one of my university professors in college, and she was my cost accounting professor, and she has great influence on me because I remember one of the things I really like about her was she has grace under pressure. And so that has really modeled to me that sometimes no matter what's going on outside of me, there's always grace available for all of us. And so her name is Cecilia Mercado, and that's one as well. And then I have another mentor, Roger James Hamilton, who actually know how you can model what your wealth dynamics is. If Oprah is a celebrity, he made her wealth using that celebrity personality. And if Warren Buffett has not done stocks because he was a trader and became a celebrity, would they have earned that wealth if not being true to their personality? We're talking about integrity, being true to ourselves. And in the context of education, if a fish is taught how to climb a tree, it will probably fail. So I learned early on that, sometimes we have to know who we are so that we know where our strengths and weaknesses are.
So that was the influence piece that you remember. That was the impact, the memory. Know, know thyself, they said in the big book. Lourdes?
Yes. Know thyself for sure.
Wow. I love that. I love that you mentioned some of those big names, and they really are true to themselves. They've done their thing in their way, and everyone else wants to follow, and yeah, you're right. Be
I think it's
authentic.
hard to follow somebody. It's hard to follow somebody if you're seeing that we're talking about walking in their talk, right? It's hard because then it will be a struggle to be able to actually model exactly how they will gain the influence from you if they're not doing them.
That's correct. And in organizational psychology, Lourdes, we call it being incongruent.
Yes.
When
Yes. And in more psychology, now that we're talking about that, my husband's first daughter, who I call my bonus daughter, is a psychologist. So uh, there's cognitive dissonance if there's
Oh, stop
alignment.
it. Love cognitive dissonance. Love it.
Yes.
And we talk about this thing here, Lourdes, and we love this. Always talking about this. And I always say, have you got any teenagers, Lourdes? You're dealing with about that part of them until they plug this little bit in here. at about the ripe old age of 25. We now know. But, we've all been there, we've all grown up, and we've all had to learn the hard way and learn to plug our frontal lobes in and make decisions as adults. And but yeah, that cognitive dissonance is a really interesting one, isn't it? It's conflicting internal beliefs. Like, how do I resolve science and religion, for example? Evolution versus science. You're a scientist, and maybe you've got a creation background as well. How do you and you deal with the dissonance of that? So anyway,
I love that you have that props. It's amazing. It makes it really concrete of what we're talking about.
doesn't it? And this is probably one of the things that is most interesting to people, Lourdes, because and while I've got the prop, this is the visual part of your brain, this is the feeling part of your brain, this is the auditory part of your brain, and of course this is where we make our decisions. But what most people don't realise is your cerebellum. There's 80% of the neurons in your brain are in this part of your brain, because that's what keeps us upright. And and they say we only use 10% of our brain, but we use most of our brain. And especially when we're communicating with another human, we now know, Lourdes, that our whole brain fires up, and especially when we're having a stimulating conversation like this, you have to be in all lobes of your brain from a visual, like things that you've said today. Our visual learners will be picturing a sea cucumber. Now, what's that look like? And they'll be thinking, well, what's 89 hectares look like?
Right.
You talk in big visuals, and I think that's really, really cool for our listeners to really, because most of us are visual learners, Lourdes.
Yes. And then you also have, I remember somebody taught me this, this front brain that we call reptilian brain. And if we talk about business, if you guys who are listening are into pitching and you're wanting to have investors into your company, most of the pitch happen on the first, I don't know, 60 seconds of your pitch. And most of the time, if you don't engage them, their reptilian brain would be like, you're talking to the reptilian brain. They will not give you their investment because maybe you didn't touch that part that actually makes that brain tick.
Love it. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. You got to be talking to the right part of the brain at the right time, Lourdes. Yeah. What else
Yeah.
did you learn from your daughter? Did you say it was your daughter that's a psychologist?
It's my bonus daughter, so my husband's first
Right,
daughter.
hubby's daughter. Yeah, cool. What else did you learn? What else? Because it's such an intriguing concept.
I believe that a lot of people have a psychology in themselves one way or another because we're all emotional beings, right? One of the things that I learned about her was she's always interested of stories of people. And I think in any industry that has that's an asset to be able to just, sit there and just learn about the person. I used to have a coach who always say, "Are you being interesting or are you being interested?" And so you always get brownie points if you're always interested in what the other person has to say. Yeah.
Wow. And it's just being prepared to be amazed, Lourdes, isn't it? Prepared to be amazed by the other human.
Yes. Yes. Because at the end of the day, I think we're all human beings who wanted to share a piece of ourselves with another person. We talk about know thyself and then serve others. And then the rest is what's your legacy? What's your stewardship? Yep.
Know thyself is number one. Number two is serve others, you said. And then if you do that well enough, number three, you'll leave a legacy. Thank you. Can I use that model?
You can use that model, but I actually copied that from one of my mentors too, Philip McKernan. His
Sure.
whole model is self, others, and work.
Self, others, and then work. I like that. Self, others, and work. I'm just writing as we talk. Lourdes, amazing conversation. Thank you so much. Now, on the theme of influence, you talked about who you've been influenced by, your professor, some coaches, And I love that you mentioned that your professor had grace under pressure. No one uses that word, Lourdes. Grace. It's a beautiful word. It's a spiritual word.
Thank you. I believe she really modeled for me how to have poise under pressure and being in business, as you know, especially in the industry I'm in, it's very male dominated. And so it's easy to get rattled with people around me, especially with the space being very, very, it's a very, very dog eat dog industry. And so if I get rattled with it, I see that my staff get rattled. So I learned early on, maybe even before I came into this industry, that Miss Cecilia Mercado really taught me how to be poised under pressure.
She gave you a great gift. She
She
gave you
did.
a great
She did,
gift.
she did give me a great gift.
Because I always say, Lourdes, that leadership shows up in times of pressure, of stress.
Right.
You, you know, when the wind's not blowing and the ocean's not raging, it's very easy to be a leader. And leadership's easy when the wind's not blowing. But when it is, and you've got to steer the ship and you've got to be calm under pressure, that's when your real true, I think, qualities show up. So thank you so much. That's amazing.
But it's also, I think, in the context that we were talking about being human beings, sometimes you just get overwhelmed by stuff. And then if someone blows up, for example, you just have to have the grace to say, I'm sorry, that was out of context. And you just get back up. We're not perfect beings.
And just apologise and make a commitment that I will be better next time. I will not
Yeah.
let that happen. I love it. Lourdes, you're such an articulate leader. You would be strong for your business. Obviously, you've grown this business. Who are you most proud of? Like, you would have been an influence on a lot of people over the time that you've been in business for the last, 9 years or 18 years that you've been in your 18. Um, who are you most proud of? Who have you had an influence on?
I'm really proud of my 16-year-old son. And I say this because I think I'm a Gen X. My husband is a baby boomer. My son is a Gen Z. So we have three generations in my own family alone. And I think if you're a Gen X like me, I think it pays to have a Gen Z mentor. I always, even though sometimes it's challenging obviously, because he's a teenager, and I always feel like I learned something from him. Like last summer, one thing I learned about him was he was so passionate about basketball. And so our family moved from one city to another because he wanted to get trained in basketball. And I said, you really didn't want to go grade 11 because you wanted to pursue this basketball. I said, I'd rather find out how good I'm going to be in this thing and then go from there. And I think not a lot of adults can say that. So I was really proud of him for being able to know what he wanted and go for it.
Follow his dream, passion
Yes. At a young age too.
at a young age. Good on you, Lewis. And you would have modelled that, as a parent.
I hope so. I'd like to take credit, but probably credit is not for me, maybe more my husband. But I think there's a lot of things to be said about Jen said. They're very aware. I said born cable ready people.
I've got, and I'm the same. I've got two little Gen Zers, and Lourdes. They're beautiful humans, and I think we give Gen Zers a hard time. I think Gen Zers get a really, really tough time,
They do. They do.
and I think every generation, bags the one after it. But I think because social media, it's more prevalent now because it's more vocal, and I think, and sadly, Lourdes, and let me get your take on this. I feel like the people that are bagging the Gen Xers, the Gen Zers, are the Gen Xers. They're people of our age. That's what it feels like. But to me, who raised them?
Yeah.
Us Gen Xers. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know for sure. I think it's a combination. Programming to any individual, I think, is a combination of a lot of things. Our parents, for sure, our peers, school that go to, their friends in the neighborhood. It's not just one thing, it's a combination of a lot of things. So, and now, especially with social media, they got information right at their fingertips. And so that's a big influence as well. So I think it's a combo of everything.
Oh, fair call. Yeah, it takes a village. No, I get that. I get that. I I guess my point was I just don't like. I feel like as a Gen X, we raised Gen Zers, and I just hope that we've done a good job with them. And I want to lift them up. I don't want to push them down and say, you're not capable, or you haven't got big enough work ethic, or all that stuff. I want to see them fly and succeed, like your 16-year-old who's already mission driven, purpose driven. Follow your dreams. But you're right.
Yes. It's interesting too because now that we're talking about it, it may not be an appropriate example, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I remember my husband said before, like, we'll do our best, obviously, and any parent will do their best for their kids. I hope one of the things that was television, right? Big influence for us Gen X, and now it's social media for Gen Z. And one thing that my husband shared with me before was like, the parents were so careful not to have their kids at a very young age watch violent movies in the TV so they can't see guns and what have you. And then this one parent put their kid in the bathtub to take a bath and pick up the docky and says bang bang, right? So you don't know where that came from. May not be the TV, but somewhere else. And parents obviously were not at fault because they were trying to look for it. But there's just a combination of a lot of things.
That's right. Good call. Good call. We're all sponges, aren't we? We are all. It's amazing how much goes into these things, Lourdes. Beautifully put. I love it. Who knows? Teachers have an influence on our kids, coaches, professors, and all sorts of people. I love it. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Um, so now, well, let's go from influence to leadership, Lourdes. And you talk about the people in your business, and I can tell that how much you would care for the people in your business. What does leadership mean to you? You said leadership, partnership, stewardship, top shelf. Started with leadership. How would you define it? What's it mean? What's your mantra?
So I mentioned we define leadership in our business as doing the right thing when no one's watching. We were at the if you're familiar with the OS entrepreneur operating system, one of the things that they define at the first onset of the intervention is how would you define a leader versus a manager. And so I've always thought that being a leader you need to have followers, but in this context it's defined as if you are somebody who own a business and you saw a garbage somewhere in your office, if you pick it up, are you a manager or are you a leader? So that's kind of how to make it concrete. Like a leader does, the right thing when no one's watching. So that's how we would define leadership.
And at the end of the day, what that's doing is walking the talk.
Yes,
Thanks.
exactly.
Well said. I love it. And I love that difference between leaders and managers. Yeah, it's such a challenge, isn't it? Sometimes some people will say, and I've read this, that leaders do people and managers do process. And it's follow the procedure and stuff. And yeah, that's interesting.
I also had a marketing coach before talking about, leaders make things happen, managers get the work done.
Right. Yes. Yes. Leaders make it happen because people buy in.
That's right. The influence that we were talking about.
Influence. Whereas managers just wield a big stick. You will, you will, you will. I love it. Thanks for
It
sharing.
it may not be a big stick too. It may be, you know, they just get things done. Getting things done is very different from making things happen. Very subtle, maybe even just on words, but there's a very big difference.
Good call. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Getting things done. Lourdes, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you're over there in the States. It's Christmas Eve for us. It's not quite yet for you. Well, Santa's coming tonight, woo, which is exciting.
Well, we've been very nice, so I'm sure Santa has something.
Oh, good. I'm glad you've been nice.
But thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
Oh, Lourdes, you're amazing. You really are. Thank you so much. Now, could I ask one huge favor? This is the way we get our next podcast guest. We'll send you an email. Deb will send you a closeout email after today, if that's okay. If you could introduce us to the next amazing human that you think would be good to have a chat to about influence and leadership, that would be really appreciated.
I will do that.
You're a legend. Thank you for listening or viewing our Find Your Influence podcast with Anton Guinea. Another great chat. Please be one of the 10% of people who follow and subscribe and like our videos so that you can get more of them and you can hear more of our amazing conversations, the conversations that I get to have and that I get to share.